A very good afternoon to all my dear students. This is the session for chapter number 3, which is risk assessment and internal control. We have already covered 1/3 of this chapter in our last session. So starting with the topic control environment that we started in the last session. So we were not able to complete that. But before that, please tell me, students, that whether you have gone through the module till page number 3.35. I've asked you to read this topic also, control environment. So quickly send in your replies. Bhumika, Om Gupta, others also please reply. So have you gone through the module till page number 3.35 except for the topic S320 materiality that we haven't covered? We didn't cover in the last session. So Om is saying he has done. Others also please reply. So we were doing internal control. So we have done limitations of internal control. We were doing this topic, components of internal control. So the components of internal control are control environment, entities, risk assessment process, information system included related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication, control activities, and monitoring of controls, right? We'll be doing all these in detail one by one. So what is control environment? If you remember, I gave you example of this example, which is mentioned on the screen also. Just a minute. So this, whereby I told you that if the traveling bills of the MD or the CEO, the rule that these traveling bills will be signed or approved by 2 officials before they are being paid. So if that rule is not been followed, let's say with respect to the MD or the CEO of the company, so chances are there that the other employees will also not follow this control. This is one of the internal control itself, right? So what is control environment? So it is, I told you that like a flower needs an environment to blossom, same way internal control also needs an environment to work, operate effectively, right? So basically, whether management has created a culture of honesty and ethical behavior. And students, we will be reading today about various elements of control environment. So whether the elements of control environment have the strength so as to provide the appropriate foundation to the other components of internal control. You all have seen that there are 5 components of internal control. So whether the elements of internal control have the strength so as to provide appropriate foundation for these components of internal control, which is what? Entities, risk assessment process, information system and communication, control activities, and monitoring of controls, right? Further, students, basically what is included in control environment? So the governance and management functions. So first point is relating to what? The management. Then the attitudes, awareness, actions of those charged with governance. So I can say management plus governance functions. This is what? Attitude, awareness, action of those charged with governance. And if you remember, I told you that the control environment, it sets the tone of the organization. That is the control consciousness of it people, whereby this example is illustrative of this point, right? That the control environment sets the tone of the organization, influencing the control consciousness of people. Like if the attitude of these person determines what? The control environment. And accordingly, control consciousness of the people means whether they are going to abide by the internal control, whether they'll follow the internal control or not, right? Is it clear? Now, the various elements of a control environment are, first is what? Communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. Same way, this example fits here. So management and others, how can they see, for all those who are involved in creating, administering, or monitoring the internal control, their example should be set so that the others in the organization also follow the internal control, right? So the effectiveness of controls cannot rise above the integrity, ethical value of the people who create, administer, and monitor them. So the person who has created, administered, and who is monitoring the internal control, if he or she is himself, herself not following the internal control, then chances are there that it will not be operating effectively in the organization, right? So it says communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. So how the same will be communicated? See, there will be certain behavioral standards that are expected, and the same will be communicated and reinforced. Reinforced is like the people are told to follow, right? How? By management actions, right? Then there can be communication to personnel through policy statements and code of conduct. If you have an idea, whenever a new joinee joins an organization, he is given a manual as to this is the code of conduct, this is the way the employees have to behave, or they have to follow the rules and regulations. So there can be policy statement, there can be certain codes of conduct, and by example management can always exemplify that this is the way the ethical and the integrity will be maintained. Ethics and integrity will be maintained within the organization, right? So what is the point? Communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical value. And this point basically says that the people who create, administer, monitor these control, the control effectiveness of control cannot rise above their integrity and ethical values, right? And there are certain behavioral standards which are communicated and reinforced. How? By management actions or policy statements or code of conduct, right? And by example. Example means the way I told you, the example of traveling bills, that if the higher authorities are following the internal control, chances are there that it will be operated effectively throughout the organization. Is it clear? Then is commitment to competence. So control environment, we are talking about elements of control environment. So whether if a particular job requires some competence level, so whether the requisite skill and knowledge is been acquired or not. So basically the personnel who are been appointed within the organization, whether it is as per the requisite skill and the knowledge. See, whether that person will follow that internal control, it all depends upon his knowledge level also, na? Whether he's having the requisite skill. So that is why commitment to competence. Participation by those charged with governance. See, those charged with governance are involved. They are separate from the management. They get the information. They scrutinize the activities. Chances are there that internal control will be followed, right? So another is what? Another element of control environment is what? Participation by those charged with governance, like their independence from management, their experience and stature, the extent of their involvement, information they receive, and the scrutiny of activity. Stature is what? Their reputation. Again, if the employees are aware that those charged with governance, they are very particular about whether the internal controls are being followed or not, whether the rules and regulations, the ethical values, the integrity is being followed or not, chances are there that the employees are going to follow their footsteps, right? Is it clear? Management philosophy and operating style. So it basically talks about the management action. See, it is about the management attitude and the management action towards the financial reporting. So basically the approach of the management, approach towards the selection of accounting policies, approach towards the development of what? Accounting estimates, approach towards taking and managing business risk, their attitude approach towards information processing and accounting function and personnel. So basically the management philosophy and operating style. See whether, like, what is the philosophy of the management when they are selecting the accounting policies or the accounting estimates. Is it a conservative approach or a regressive one? So the control environment, the elements of control environment include the management philosophy and operating style. The organizational structure. See, what is organizational structure? It is basically a framework within which entities' activity for achieving the objectives are planned, executed, controlled, and reviewed. So this line explains as to what is an organization structure, right? Now, another important element of control environment is organization structure, which may vary according to the size and nature of the business. And basically, it includes considering key areas of authority, responsibility, and appropriate lines of reporting, right? Then is again authority responsibility. So how the reporting relationships and authorization hierarchies are established, right? See, if there is a balance between authority and responsibility, chances are there that employees will not resort to any collusion, or they will not override the internal controls, right? So there needs to be a balance between the authority and responsibility. And last but not the least is human resource policies and practices. See, a very important element of control environment, the policies and practices. What are HR policies? Quickly, without looking at the module, tell me what comes to your mind. HR policies are related to what all things? Quickly send in your replies. So relating to the evaluation, relating to the counseling, the promotion, the compensation, the remedial actions, Hana. So the HR policies also form one of the important elements of the control environment. So the standards for recruiting, whether most qualified individuals, see, if a person is qualified according to the requirement of the job, then the chances are more that the internal control is going to be followed, right? Then educational background, whether it is considered or not, training policies that communicate prospective roles and responsibilities, right? Promotions driven by periodic performance appraisal. See, tell me, if let's say there is a company whereby there are no promotions that has been done for the last 2 or 3 years, chances are there now that out of frustration or out of you can say the urge to get promoted, the employee resort to unfair means, or they commit fraud, or chances are there. So human resource policies and practices, see, if the employee is satisfied with the environment that is getting, chances are there he'll abide by the internal control that has been implemented. So that is why human resource policies and practices, they form an important element of the control environment, right? So what are the various elements? Communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. This is on the part of management, right? Commitment to competence. Basically, it says that whether the requisite skill and knowledgeable person are being hired or not. Participation by those charged with governance, their independence, their involvement, whatever information they get, the scrutiny, right? And their reputation, stature, and the experience. Then management philosophy and operating style with respect to various aspects like accounting estimate, accounting policies, they're taking and managing business risk towards account information processing, accounting function. Organizational structure. Then first of all, it explains what is organization structure. So it is a framework within which entities' activities for achieving the objective are planned, executed, controlled, and reviewed. So whether uh, it includes what? Considering key areas of authority, responsibility, and appropriate lines of reporting, and it depends upon size and nature of the activities. Assignment of authority, responsibility, and last but not the least is human resource policies and practices. So you may get a 3-mark question that one of the important elements of control environment is what? Human resource and policies and practices. How? Explain. So this is the answer. So Swati, Bhumika, Ayushi, whatever you have written, like how the employees will behave, hiring employees, promotion and transfer orientation, this is absolutely correct, right? We discussed this paragraph also in the last class, that existence of a satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. What is meant by deterrent? Deterrent is what? Discouragement. So, see, if there is no satisfactory control environment, then it will undermine the effectiveness of internal control, right? Because control environment is very weak. So auditor can assess that, okay, if the control environment is not satisfactory, chances are there that there are what the internal control is less effective, but vice versa, that satisfactory control environment. So auditor cannot say now there will not be any fraud. That is not possible. So let us read this. The existence of a satisfactory control environment. Just a minute. Let me just take you through the notes. So see, the existence of what? Satisfactory control environment. So it is a positive factor in auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement. It helps to reduce the risk of fraud, right? But it is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. However, a deficiency in control environment, it means that it undermines the effectiveness of internal control. See, now if the internal control is not effective according to the auditor, this is going to affect the nature, timing, extent of further audit procedure, which the auditor is going to perform as per SA 330. If there is deficiency in control environment, it means that it is not able to prevent, detect, and correct any material misstatement. The controls are not able to see. Ineffective control, internal control means that they are not able to prevent or detect and control in material misstatement. And that is going to influence the auditor's evaluation of effectiveness of internal control and his assessment of risk of material misstatement. See, student, this is the way you can make a summary or a note out for, let me just show. I've made this summary, or you can say notes, for this paragraph. So maybe learning from this paragraph or revising from this paragraph, some students might find it difficult. So this is the way you can just pick up the keywords. So basically it says that satisfactory control environment is a positive factor in auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement because it helps reducing the risk of fraud. But the same is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. Deterrent is what? Discouragement or hindrance, right? A deficiency in control environment, it undermines the effectiveness of internal control, and this affects the nature, timing, extent of further audit procedure as per SA 330. When there is deficiencies control environment, it means that the control environment does not in itself prevent or detect and control a material misstatement. If you remember, I've discussed this prevent or detect and control a material misstatement in detail. Tell me, where have we done this? Quickly tell me, where have we done this? Does not in itself prevent or detect and control a material misstatement. This is the test of whether you have gone through the module of the from the topic that we have covered in the last session. Quickly tell me. Quickly tell me. Swati, Bhumika, Ayushi, Om. Please reply. So meanwhile, you will send the replies. Let us finish this topic. And see, if the control and there is deficiency in control environment, this is going to influence the auditor's evaluation of effectiveness of internal control. Why is auditor evaluating the internal control? Because he wants to assess what? Risk of material misstatement, which is in turn going to assess the affect the auditor's evaluation of risk of material misstatement. So yes, in risk of material misstatement, we have done control risk. There we have done this. So I hope this topic control environment is clear to all of you. So what we were doing the various components of internal control. Control environment we have done, whereby we have seen what is included in internal control, right? Then we saw that what are the various elements of control environment, right? And then we saw that satisfactory control environment is not an absolute deterrent to fraud. Now the next is entities risk assessment process. So this point is talking about what? Entities risk assessment process. So what we are trying to understand, we are trying to understand the components of internal control of the organization. So who is responsible for implementation, design, implementation, maintenance of internal control? It is the management, right? The entity basically. So if I ask you that out of entity and auditor, who is responsible for design, implementation of internal control? It is the entity. So whether entity is having its system, its process of risk assessment, right? So primary responsibility is with respect to risk assessment is that of the management or the entity, right? So the auditor shall obtain an understanding of whether the entity has a process for identifying business risk. See, what kind of business risks can be there? So certain examples are given. So it can be in the form of new technology, new business models, products or activities, changes in operating environment, right? So these are what various kinds of business risks. See, if a new technology has come and the entity is not aware about it, है vis-a-vis a situation where the entity has already started working on the new technology. Entity has already started preparing products on the new technology. So, which is a better situation? The second one. So, the auditor shall obtain an understanding of whether the entity has a process for identifying the business risk, estimating the significance of the risk, assessing the likelihood of their occurrence, and deciding about the actions to address those risks, right? So what understanding the auditor is gaining? Whether the entity has identified, estimated the significance, assessed the likelihood, the probability of its occurrence, and then decided the action. So I told you that, okay, the entity has identified that a new technology has come, estimated the significance, whether the same is significant for the organization, assessing the likelihood, how much chance is there that that technology will be in, like it will be there in the market. Then how to deal with it, the actions, right? And the entity's risk assessment process forms the basis for the risks to be managed. See, if the entity assesses the risk, then only it will be in a position to manage the same now. And if such process is appropriate, see, if this process which the entity is following, if it is appropriate, it would help the auditor in identifying risk of material misstatement. Why? Because when the auditor will perform the risk assessment procedure in order to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement, he will inquire with the management, and let's say the management say that, listen auditor, we have identified and assessed and evaluated that such kind of technology changes are going to come. So now this is going to assist the auditor in identifying the risk of material misstatement. And what can be various kinds of risk? We have discussed earlier that technology or new models or products or services. And whether when we say that if it is appropriate, it would assist the auditor. Now, is there a definition of appropriateness? No, it depends upon the auditor's professional judgment, right? So it is a matter of judgment whether the entity's risk assessment process is appropriate or not. Is it clear? So first component of internal control is what? Control environment. And then we have done entity's risk assessment process. Don't get confused with auditor's risk assessment process here. Here, see, internal control ka component to jo entity, the work that entity is doing, that will be the component of the internal control. Na? Then see, the third point is what? Information system. See, where will the internal control be implemented? On the information system, so that the financial reporting or the communication is proper, right? So the third point is information system, including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. So there are 2 points. Second one is relating to what? Communication. First is relating to what? Information system. Now, first of all, what is included in information system? Tell me quickly, send in your replies. What is included in information system? Information system में क्या क्या include होता है? Quickly send in your replies. Swati, Bhumika, Ayushi, Om. Swati saying software, absolutely correct. Others also please reply. So see, an information system consists of infrastructure, physical hardware components, software, people, procedures, and data. Many information systems make extensive use of IT, information technology, right? An information system should provide what? Qualitative financial information, Why? Because the quality of system generated information is going to affect what management's ability to make appropriate decisions in managing and controlling an entity's activities and to prepare reliable financial reports. So this paragraph basically says that why information system is important component of your internal control. So it basically defines what is information system and why is it important. Why? Because if it generates qualitative financial information, then that qualitative financial information will help the management to take what appropriate decisions. Simple. This paragraph is simple, right? Now comes that when the auditor is obtaining an understanding about the information system, then what all areas will be included for what he is going to obtain information. So the auditor shall obtain an understanding of information system, including related business processes relevant to financial reporting, including the following areas, right? Now see, when the financial statements are prepared, right? So there will be what certain significant classes of transactions, right? There will be certain supporting documents with respect to the accounting records, right? There will be a system of how there will be a system as to how the events, important events, conditions, transactions, how they are captured, right? How the financial reporting process is executed so that the financial statements are prepared. So all these areas will be covered when the auditor is obtaining an understanding about the information system. So basically how the information is put in, how the same is processed, and how the final outcome is received, right? So this is just an idea. What are these points? Let us just have a look. So A, the classes of transaction in the entity's operation that are significant. Significant classes of transaction, auditor is going to understand those. Why? Because he wants to know whether the control with respect to those transactions, whether those are effective or not, right? The procedures by which those transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, corrected as necessary, transferred to GL, reported in financial statement. So this one line states that how the transactions are initiated and how the same are reported. Simple. The related accounting records supporting information, specific amounts, financial statement that are used to initiate, record, process, and report transaction. So here it says that, let's say a sales transaction is there, to how the same is initiated, how the same process is initiated, and how the same is reflected in the financial statement. Now, when the sales transaction is recorded in the financial statement, there must be certain report supporting information, certain accounts, like certain information, the accounting records, how the same are used to initiate, record, and report the transactions. How information system captures events, conditions that are significant to the financial statement. Right? Let's say some interest payment is to be done with respect to a debt every month. So there can be an internal control within the information system that every month a reminder will come, an entry will be posted, right? The reminder will be given to the concerned person, entry will be parked automatically, right? The financial reporting process used to prepare the entity's financial statement and controls surrounding their general entries. So if you can just have conclude that out of these points that we are discussing, it is basically talking about what the entire reporting process, how the transactions are initiated till how they are controlled, how the supporting documents are there, how the general entries are controlled, all those points, right? Then I told you that this point is about two things, information system and the communication. So the next point says that how the auditor shall obtain an understanding of how entity communicates financial reporting roles and responsibilities. So when I tell you that I have given you an example, then that the entry will be automatically parked in the, let's say, SAP system has been used. So entry is automatically parked, a reminder mail is automatically given to the concerned personnel. So whether he is aware that he is required to do something out of that entry, or something out of that mail. So how the entity communicates financial reporting roles and responsibilities. And again, if you remember, I gave you example that when a person joins, policy manuals are given. Accounting and financial reporting manuals are there. Memoranda is what summaries are there. And it can be through electronically or through actions of, again, management, right? So is it clear? So what was this point? This was with respect to information system, including the related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. So this was the third component of internal control, right? Now the next fourth one is what? Control activities. Students, if you remember, I always give you example that segregation of duty is one of the internal control. Preparation of bank reconciliation statement is one of the internal control. So basically, these are what? These are the control activities. These are what? Control activities. So auditor will obtain an understanding of the control activities relevant to audit, which auditor consider necessary to assess the risk of material misstatement. See, throughout the organization, there must be a number of control activities that have been implemented by the management. So those that are relevant for the audit, for the assessment of risk of material misstatement, auditor is going to consider that, right? So if we just have a look at the definition, so this is basically the definition of control activities. Control activities are the policies, procedures that help ensure that management directives are carried out. So if management has given a direction, whether that has been carried out. So management, let's understand this with the help of our example. Management has given a direction that there should be what? Segregation of duty. So now it will be checked whether this segregation of duty has been done or not. Or management has given a direction that one bill will be processed by 3 persons. So segregation of duty is one of the activities which will be followed, right? And another example can be what? Comparison of your actual performance with the budgets. This is again what? Another control activity. Information processing, that is controls over arithmetical accuracy of records, program control. Physical controls, controls over physical security of the asset, and segregation of duty. So these are what? Control activities. See, let's say the management has implemented any control, internal control, but there are no control activities to see whether they are been operating effectively or not. Then will there be effective internal control? No. So control activities again become one of the important component of your internal control. And again, last but not the least is what? Monitoring of control. Quickly tell me who will be doing the monitoring of control? Whose responsibility is this? Is this the entity or the auditor? Quickly send in your replies. Monitoring of controls. Send in your replies. So Swati saying management, Ayushi saying entity, Om, so, absolutely correct. It is the entity. Okay. So monitoring of control. So first of all, let us look at the definition. So monitoring of control is a process to assess the effectiveness of internal control performance over time. So whether it is operating effectively or not. See, monitoring is required now. See, whenever I discuss the next chapter with you, I always ask you whether you are aware about the earlier concepts or not, in order to see whether you are actually following what I have told you in the very first session that you need to revise. So I'm monitoring it now in order to see whether whatever I told you in the very first session that has been effectively followed by you. So it is a process to assess the effectiveness of internal control performance over time, right? Why? Because if it is not been working in an effective manner, then remedial actions can be taken, right? Then only I can see if I ask you a question and you are not able to answer with respect to the first chapter, then I'll repeat it that students, it is necessary for you that before coming for this session, you need to do whatever we have done so far. So I'm taking what remedial action here, right? It includes considering whether controls are operating as intended and that they are modified as appropriate for changes in condition. So if some changes are required, then the same can be, the remedial action can be taken and modification can be done, right? Now, it is possible that such monitoring can be done through ongoing activities or through separate evaluation. So, for example, I can ask you during the session that whether you have done whatever was told to you in the first session. So, ongoing activity. Or I might take a separate session in order to see whether you are following that thing or not. So, separate evaluation or a combination of both. Ongoing monitoring activities are often built into the normal recurring activities and include regular management and supervisory activities. So on a regular basis, I'll be asking you this question, right? Management's monitoring activity may include using information from communications from external parties. I may get complaints from your parents that he or she is not studying. So I may use that also. Management's monitoring activities may include using information from communication from external parties like your customer complaints or the regulator comments. So I'll put your parents at regulator comments, not customer complaints. Okay? So I hope this topic is clear to you. Monitoring of control, right? So what we have seen that what is the purpose of monitoring of control? So it is the process to assess the effectiveness of internal control performance over time. Why? So that remedial actions can be taken, right? Then it says that it can be through ongoing activities, separate evaluation, or a combination of both. And if it is going through ongoing activity, then normal recurring activities it will happen and regular management and supervisory activities will be required. And last, it says the management may take the information from communications from external parties like customer complaints and regular comments, right? Is it clear? Yes, Bhumika, you are absolutely correct. She's saying it is the management's responsibility to monitor that whether or not the control implemented by them is operating effectively or not, right? Right. Is it clear? Is it clear? So we have done 5 components of internal control. Students, really very, very important topic from the examination point of view. You may get a 3-mark question or 4-mark question. Like you may get a question that explain the entity's risk assessment process. Like maybe some explanation or some practical aspects, and then you will be asked to explain the entity's assessment process or the monitoring of controls, right? So it may appear to be a little bit technical to all of you, but if you just understand, again, as I always say, that conceptual knowledge, if you have understood, then learning after understanding and writing after, that is going to be a cakewalk for all of you. So quickly tell me, are you able to understand this topic? Then we'll proceed with the next topic. So I was discussing with you that we have done 5 components, that is control environment, entities, risk assessment process, information system and communication, and your control activities and the monitoring of control. Quickly send in your replies whether this topic is clear to you or is there any doubt. Then we'll be starting with the next topic. If you all are clear with this topic, then quickly go through test your understanding 7. This is on page number 3.38. 3.38. So Bhumika is saying, ma'am, it's clear. Om Gupta is saying, ma'am, clear. Others also please reply. Kiran, Ayushi, Bhumika has already replied. Swati, others also please reply. So go through this test your understanding 7. So it says that Ch3 is the auditor of the company. As part of audit, she is going through company's policies, practices regarding employee recruitment, training, orientation related matters. She seems to be very much interested in finding out whether the company hires the best candidate from the applicant pool. Identify what she is trying to do. How gaining knowledge about this aspect is useful for her as an auditor. Quickly send in your replies. See, she is trying to understand what? Swati, you are correct. Others also please reply. So she's trying to understand what control environment. Why? Because her understanding of control environment is going to help her in understanding the internal control. Is it clear? Read this eighth test your understanding. During the audit of the same company, CS Smriti is keen to find out whether there exists a proper system of segregation of duty. She wants to be sure that a person responsible for recording a transaction is different from the person authorizing it. Discuss what is she trying to do and how its understanding is significant for her. Please reply. So again, a practical based question, but concept based on your concepts only, conceptual knowledge. So she's understanding what? Control activities. Again, it is going to help her in understanding what? The internal control. Is it clear? Right. Now the next topic, there are now next 4-5 topics which are very small but important, right? So let us just quickly have a look. Are all controls relevant to the audit? Quickly send in replies. Are all controls relevant to audit? See, Ayushi, the answer is not information and communication. Here, she is trying to look at what segregation of duty na, with respect to test of understanding 8. So this is what segregation of duty, and we saw that this is one of the control activities. See if you just have a look here. So this is segregation of duty na. Ayushi, is it clear? Quickly send in your replies. Are all controls relevant to audit? See, in an organization, in order to achieve the organization objectives, there can be control with respect to financial reporting, the operations of the organization, and the compliances within the organization, right? And there is a direct relationship between the entity's objective and the control it implements. And I told you that control can be with respect to what? Financial reporting, operations, and compliance. However, all these controls are not relevant to audit, right? So what are the points that the factors that the auditor should consider in order to see whether a particular control is relevant or not, right? So see if that control is on a material transaction or a material aspect of the organization, then this is what it can be what? Relevant to audit. So basically what we are discussing, the factors relevant to auditor's judgment about whether a control individually or in combination with others is relevant to the audit may include such matters as the following. See, whether a control is relevant or not, it depends upon auditor's professional judgment. But while applying the professional judgment, what all factors the auditor can consider, this is the topic that we are looking at. So as a thumb rule, not all controls. All controls में what all is included? Financial reporting से related control, the operations of the company से related control, and the compliance से. So it says that, however, not all of these objectives and controls are relevant to the auditor's risk assessment. Then what are the factors that the auditor needs to consider? So materiality, significance of related risk, size of the entity, nature of entity's business, including organization and ownership characteristics, diversity, complexity of entity's operation, legal regulatory requirements, circumstances and applicable component of the internal control, nature, complexity of the system that are part of entity's internal control, including the use of service organization, whether and how a specific control individually or in combination prevents, detects, and corrects material misstatements. So I'll discuss each point separately. So I hope you are able to understand as to what we are going to study in this chapter. In this topic. So we are basically studying as to what factors auditor will consider in order to see whether a particular control is relevant or not, right? So if that control pertains to any material transaction or material aspect of the organization, then that internal control becomes relevant to the audit. If the related risk is significant, let's say there is an internal control with respect to related parties, this is going to be significant, this is going to be relevant to audit. The size of the entity. See, if it is a very small entity, the auditor may then decide not to rely on the internal control, right? And if it is a very big entity with a volume of transactions, then this again becomes a factor for the auditor to decide whether a particular control is relevant or not. Clear? The nature of entity's business, including its organization ownership characteristics, diversity, complexity of entity's operation, the legal and regulatory requirements. See, if as per any legal and regulatory requirements, there is a requirement on the auditor, or let's say on the company, to abide by certain rules or regulations. Otherwise, there will be some monetary implications, some fines and penalties. The internal controls become what? Relevant. Circumstances and the applicable component of internal control. Nature, complexity of the system that are part of entities' internal control, including the use of service organization. If the company has outsourced, let's say it's payroll to any service organization. So if the company has outsourced any of its function to another organization, that other organization is what? Service organization. So that aspect also auditor has to consider whether the internal control with respect to that arrangement is relevant or not, and whether and how a specific control individually or in combination with other prevents or detects and corrects material misstatement. See, let's say if a particular control has been implemented and after the assessment, auditor assesses that this control is not able to prevent or detect and correct material misstatement. So will auditor consider that control relevant to audit? No. What will he do then? He will extend his substantive procedures. He will not rely on that internal control. So whether a control is relevant or not, these are the factors that the auditor is going to consider. So is it clear? Is this topic clear? You can always get a 4-mark question that what are the factors auditor needs to consider when in order to see whether a control is relevant to audit or not, right? So is it clear? Now, controls over completeness, accuracy of information. So whether these are relevant to auditor or not. See, whether the information is complete, whether the information is accurate. So let's say if the auditor is applying an audit procedure whereby he is performing what? Analytical procedures. We will be doing analytical procedures in detail when we'll be doing essay 520. But if you remember, I have told you in the last session, then when the auditor is calculating ratio analysis, or let's say when the auditor, let's say he has to see whether the sales amount is correct or not. So what he does, he multiplies the volume by whatever is the price. Now this volume, this needs to be complete now. If 10,000 or let's say 1 lakh quantities were sold, so he will be concerned about the completeness. He will be concerned about the prices, that is accuracy of this information, that value and price, whether this is accurate or not, whether this is complete or not. So if the auditor intends to make use of the information in designing and performing further procedures, for example, in auditing revenue by applying standard prices to record the sales value, the auditor considers accuracy of price information and completeness and accuracy of the sales volume data, right? Controls relating to operations and compliance objective may also be relevant if they relate to data the auditor evaluates or uses in applying audit procedures. So here also we are saying that completeness and accuracy of the information, be it relating to financial reporting, be it related to objectives, be it operations, be it related to the compliance. Auditor will be concerned if he uses that information in applying the audit procedures. And we have seen one example here with respect to financial reporting, that if he's evaluating the sales data by, let's say, applying a simple formula of total volume of the sales multiplied by the price, so he will be concerned whether that volume is complete or not. Clear? Very simple. Then internal control over safeguarding of assets. Again, whether the internal control over safeguarding of assets, whether it is relevant to audit. Let's say the asset is cash. So this is going to be relevant for auditor now, because it is going to have an financial impact. So internal control over safeguarding of assets against unauthorized acquisition, use, disposition may include controls relating to, again, both financial reporting as well as operations. The auditor's consideration of such control is generally limited to reliability of financial reporting. For example, use of access controls such as passwords that limit access to data and programs that process cash disbursements may be relevant to financial statement audit. Conversely, safeguarding the controls relating to operation objectives, such as controls to prevent the excessive use of material in production, generally are not relevant to the financial statement audit. See, now comes what is covered in the scope of audit. So, see, auditor is basically concerned that, okay, the quantity which has been given, which has been actually used. Now, whether that is access or not. So, whether that is access or not, it is relating to operation activity. If it has been used, whether it is coming correctly or not, that is what financial aspect. But if that is access or not, that is a control relating to operation. So that maybe that is not relevant for the financial statement audit. Clear? Now, controls relating to objectives that are not relevant to audit. So the last point says that if there are certain controls which are relating to the objectives that are not relevant to audit, so they are not relevant to audit. It is mentioned here. Consider an example. The example that is given here is that of the airlines. So suppose the auditor is conducting the audit of a company, of an airline company, and that airline company is having a system to maintain the flight schedules. Now, this is not relevant to audit now, right? However, in certain circumstances, if the regulation or the statute requires the auditor to report on the compliance with certain specific areas of internal control, then that becomes relevant to the audit. As simple as that. So this paragraph basically gives an example of the control which is not relevant to audit. So an entity generally has control relating to objectives that are not relevant to audit and therefore need not to be considered. The thumb rule is this. However, if there is a requirement by the laws, regulations, or the statute that the auditor needs to report on compliance with certain specific aspects of internal control, then the result of the auditor's review of internal control may be broader and more detailed. That is, it may extend beyond the financial reporting also if the same is required by the statute or the regulation. Is it clear? Quickly send in your replies. Then we'll start with the next topic. Quickly send in your replies. Students, I'm waiting for your replies. So Bhumika, Swati, Om, they are saying yes, ma'am, it is clear. Now, nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. So what is the next topic? As students, when we'll revise, I'll take you through these notes of 4 points. Nature, extent of understanding of relevant controls. Ayushi, Swati, they are also saying, ma'am, it is clear. See, students, nature and extent of understanding of relevant control. See, this topic is talking about two aspects of internal control: the design and implementation of internal control. Quickly tell me, without reading, please tell me that the auditor should consider first the design of the internal control or the implementation. He should understand the design or the implementation. Send in your replies. Swati, Bhumika, Ayushi, Om, Kiran. So students, see what is design. So basically, design involves considering. So Om, Ayushi, Bhumika, Kiran, Manish, Ayushi, you all are absolutely correct. Okay? So देखो design, it basically means when the auditor is considering the design of internal control, he is actually understanding whether the internal control is effective in preventing or detecting and controlling material misstatement. And implementation means whether the internal control so designed, whether it actually exists and whether it has been used by the entity. So tell me, if the design is not good, is it required to consider whether it is implemented or not? So the answer is no. So if an internal control is improperly designed, then it means that there is significant deficiency in internal control. So auditor is first going to look at the design, whether it is effective in preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement. Is it clear? So let us have a read from the module. So design, what is meant by design? So evaluating the design of a control involves considering whether the control individually or in combination with other control is capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement, right? And what is meant by implementation of a control? It means that the control exists and the entity is using it. There is little point in assessing the implementation of the control that is not effective. So the design of the control is considered first. I hope it is clear now, right? An improperly designed control may represent significant deficiencies in internal control. Now, in order to obtain audit evidence with respect to design implementation of relevant control, tell me what risk assessment procedures the auditor can perform. Again, this is a test of what we have done in the last session. Quickly send in your replies. Risk assessment procedures. What are the risk assessment procedures that the auditor will perform in order to see whether a particular, in order to obtain evidence with respect to design implementation of relevant control? So the procedures are going to remain the same: inquiry, observation, inspection. Remember, tracing transaction through information system. And you all know that inquiry alone is not sufficient for such purposes, right? This is very, very important. See, inquiry alone is not efficient now. Along with inquiry, auditor may perform other procedures also. Like what? He may reperform, or he may inspect, he may observe. Abhi to he is performing what? Risk assessment procedures now. So he will observe, he will inspect, right? Along with inquiry, right? Is it clear? Is it clear? And student, this paragraph basically says that, see, if an auditor obtains an understanding about the working of an internal control, and that internal control is manual, so is that sufficient that auditor has obtained an understanding once? So the answer is no. Why? Because this is a manual control. Manual control has its disadvantages. Then the same can be manipulated. If there is a change in personnel, the same may not function well. Yes, if it is an if it is an automated control, then obtaining an understanding would be sufficient, provided auditor's assessment about the changes that has been made in the automated internal control. So it basically says that manual may obtaining understanding once is not sufficient. Why? Because chances are there that manual can always be manipulated. However, automated may, since there is inherent consistency, now, see, if there is an automated control, chances are there that it will work the same way as it is working at a particular point of time. So when the auditor checked it at a particular point of time, chances are there that throughout the year it is working the same, right? So let us just read it from the module. Obtaining an understanding of the entity's control is not sufficient to test their operating effectiveness unless there is some automation that provides for consistent operation of the controls. For example, obtaining audit evidence about implementation of a manual control at a point in time does not provide audit evidence about operating effectiveness of the control at other times during the period under audit. However, because of the inherent consistency, see, we have studied only negative inherent things like inherent limitations. So this is a positive aspect of automated control now, that there is what inherent consistency of IT processing. Performing audit procedures to determine whether an automatic control has been implemented may serve as a test that controls about the control's operating effectiveness, depending upon auditor's assessment and testing of controls such as those over program changes. So if auditor is satisfied that in the automated internal control, if any change is made, that will be reflected, or that is, the control with respect to that program change is effective. So in that case, obtaining understanding once about an automated internal control is what? Sufficient. Is it clear? Is it clear? Right? So this was with respect to your nature and extent of understanding of relevant control, right? So today we have covered the various components of internal control. I'll just take you again to that sheet, just a minute. So control environment, entities, risk assessment process, information system, including, see, information system, including the, just a minute, related business processes relevant to financial reporting and communication. Then we did control activities and monitoring of control. Then we did various small topics, that whether all controls are relevant to audit. So we discussed that controls may relate to what? Financial reporting, operations, and compliance. And whether a control is relevant or not, auditor is going to consider various factors which are mentioned in this blue box, right? Controls over completeness and accuracy. If the auditor uses such data, then it can be what? Relevant. For example, sales ka example bhi do it. Internal control over safeguarding of assets. If it's relating to, let's say, cash disbursements, password and all relating to cash disbursement, then that is relevant. But where it is relating to operations specifically, that is whether the excessive use of material in production is there, then that is not relevant. If the controls are not relevant, they are not to be considered. But if the statute or the regulation requires the auditor to report on such compliance, then the auditor's review of internal control becomes broader and more detailed. That is, he may have to include such assessment also. And example of airline is given here. Nature, extent of understanding of relevant controls, may we have understood that what is design, what is meant by understanding design, evaluating the design, then what is meant by implementing. So first and foremost, auditor will consider what? Design. Why? Because improperly designed control represent what? Significant deficiency. And how will he do that? By performing risk assessment procedures. How? Inquiring, observation, inspecting, and inquiry alone is not sufficient. Then we saw that automated internal control is there and auditor is satisfied with respect to the controls on the program changes. Then obtaining information once is also sufficient, but this is not the case with respect to manual internal control. I hope the topics are clear to all of you. Now the next topic is, this is again really very, very important. Risk that require special consideration. Risks that require special considerations. So first of all, let us just have a look at the definition of significant risk. So we are on page number 3.42. So the definition of significant risk is given here. Just a minute. This. So significant risk are inherent risk with both a higher likelihood of occurrence and a higher magnitude of potential misstatement. So what is significant risk? So these are inherent risks with both higher likelihood of occurrence. The chances that such risk will occur is high, Plus, if it will occur, the magnitude, the impact will be what? That it will be potential, the magnitude of potential misstatement will be what? High. So higher likelihood of occurrence and higher magnitude of potential misstatement. Magnitude is what? The impact, right? And students, whenever there will be fraud or there will be related party transaction, these are what? Significant risk. So anything where even if a very small fraud has been committed, it always becomes what? Significant risk. Why? Because chances of other frauds are also there. Same way, related party transaction, since manipulations can be done here. So again, it is what? Significant risk. First of all, tell me whether the definition, the concept of significant risk, whether it is clear or not. We have done that. Significant risk is the inherent risk with two things. Chances bhi zyada hai hone ke, and then the impact is also going to be higher. Higher likelihood of occurrence and a higher magnitude of potential misstatement. Fraud, related party transaction, these are basically what? Significant risk. These are always what? Significant risk. Now, when the auditor is considering whether a risk is significant or not, the auditor is going to consider various factors. So, as a part of risk assessment, the auditor shall determine whether any risk identified are, in the auditor's judgment, a significant risk. In exercising the judgment, see, there is no like outline as to this specific risk is significant or this is not significant. It all depends upon auditor's judgment. But when the auditor is making that judgment, he will consider certain things that, okay, this relates to fraud, this is going to be significant. This relates to related party, this is going to be significant. This relates to a complex transaction, this is going to be significant. There is a change in the regulatory environment or any accounting or economic development has been there, that is going to be significant. The subjective decisions have been taken, like accounting estimates, where there is material uncertainty. Again, the risk is going to be significant. And if any non-routine transaction is there, again, auditor is going to consider that significant. Very logical. So whether a risk is a risk of fraud, whether the risk is related to recent significant economic accounting developments like changes in regulatory environment. See, because chances are there that where, let's say, there is a significant change in the accounting or let's say regulatory environment. If the management wants to do some manipulation, it may consider this situation as apt because there is a change in the economic accounting environment. Complexity of transactions, mergers, acquisitions, subsidiaries, holding complex transactions. So chances of what? That becomes what? Significant risk. So it is not necessary that there will be some problem, but these are what? Significant risk where the auditor needs to concentrate or give his more time and team, right? The risk that involves what? Related parties. The degree of subjectivity in the measurement of financial information, your accounting estimates, where there is what? Measurement uncertainty. And last but not the least, where the significant transactions that are outside the normal course of the business and otherwise where they appear to be unusual. Now, why this transaction becomes significant, right? And why this transaction becomes, this point becomes significant. These are the next two topics. So why E and F are included in these lists? See, fraud ka significance kyun hai? You all know that if fraud is there, then means management is manipulating the things. There is collusion. Chances that there are other frauds is high. So it is significant. Changes, may I told you that manipulations can be done. Complexity of transactions, significant. Related party, because manipulations can be done. Even if auditor asks the other party is the related party of the entity. So auditor may not get the desired result. So it becomes significant. Now where subjectivity, that is judgment, is involved, or where they are unusual transactions. So why they are significant? So this is given in paragraph number 5.2 and 5.3. So I hope whatever we have done is clear. So the next topic is what? Risk of material misstatement greater for significant non-routine transaction, right? See, if there is a non-routine transaction, so we are not talking about sales, purchase, the routine transaction, no. Let's say there is some merger acquisition, non-routine, or let's say there is a huge scrap sale that has been done, right? So in that case, since it is a non-routine transaction, greater management intervention will be there to specify the accounting treatment. Greater manual intervention will be there. Why? Because system may, there will not be any automatic system now, because this transaction has occurred once for the first time, let's say, because it is non-routine in nature. Complex calculations or accounting policies, and the nature of non-routine transaction, which may make it difficult for the entity to implement effective control. Why? Because it's a non-routine transaction. So it is difficult for the organization to implement any control which is effective. So these are the reasons why the risk related to the significant non-routine transactions, the risk is what? Greater. So greater management intervention, greater manual intervention, complex calculations or accounting principles, and since the nature of non-routine transaction is such that it becomes difficult for the entity to implement the effective control. Clear? Same way, where judgments are involved, right? Where there is judgments, then it says that accounting principles for accounting estimates, revenue recognition may be subject to differing interpretation. Management of A Limited may have a different perception vis-a-vis management of B Limited, or the auditor is having some different perception vis-a-vis the management. So different interpretation. Further, required judgment may be subjective or complex and require assumptions about the effects of future events. Example, judgments about fair value. So judgments differ from person to person, from management to management. So that is why the judgmental matters also become what? Significant risk. Is it clear? Is it clear? So see, whatever topics we are doing now, more or less these are given in essay 315. We will be starting with, if the time permits, essay 330 also. So there also you will see that some of these things are also discussed. So these are relating to what? See, we are discussing what? Risk of material mistake, of material misstatement. So these topics are relating to what? Risk. So whether a risk is significant or not. So we have discussed various factors the auditor is going to consider. Out of those factors, 2 factors we have discussed in detail here. What is significant risk is given here in this paragraph. So students, why I'm repeating this again, or why I just tell you that this is given here, this is given here, because if you have an outline in your mind now that, okay, I have done this topic here, then it was followed by that topic. So chances are there that in your exam, you will be able to recall, acha, haan, I did that topic, and below that, there was a topic relating to significant risk. The definition was given there. Anna. So try to just imagine that as to what is given on a particular page so that you are able to recall in your exams. Okay. Now tell me, is evaluation of internal control system, will evaluation of internal control system have any benefit to the audit or the auditor? See, why is auditor evaluating the internal control system? Because there are certain benefits that will flow from the evaluation of internal control. See, this evaluation of internal control system, this is an indispensable part of the overall examination and evaluation of that the auditor performs. Why? Because see, what is the purpose? Is the auditor required to give any opinion on the internal control? The answer is no. He has to give his opinion on the financial statements. So for that, he must be aware about whether the accounting system is working properly or not. And after having a look at the internal control, so internal control helps the auditor in getting an assurance as to whether the accounting system is working effectively or not. So this is the only reason why the auditor is evaluating the internal control system. Now, various benefits that will come to the auditor when he evaluates the internal control system are given in paragraph 6.1, which is given on page number 3.43. So, Before looking at the points given in the module, students tell me 1 or 2 points. What benefits comes to your mind? That benefits of evaluation of internal control to the auditor. Quickly send in your replies. Quickly send in your replies. Om, Bhumika, Swati, Kiran, Ayushi. So students, see, after having an evaluation of the internal control, see, after having an evaluation, auditor will be able to know now whether IC are effective or not, whether accounting system is effective or not. So auditor will be able to know whether errors and frauds are likely to be located in the ordinary course of operations of the business. See, if IC is working properly, management will be able to know about the errors. So detection of error and omission, Bhumika is saying. Ayushi is saying it can save time of auditor in some area. Om is saying most accurate changes addressing error. Okay. So it helps the auditor to know whether the errors and frauds are likely to be located in the ordinary course of operations of the business. Why? Because internal controls are effective now. Let's say auditor is able to understand that internal control are working effectively, which means that if any error or error is there or fraud is there with respect to accounting system, the same will be located. Then after having an evaluation of internal control, auditor will be able to understand as to whether an adequate internal control system is in use and operating as planned by the management, whether an effective internal audit department is operating or not, whether administrative controls has a bearing on his work. For example, this example beautifully explains this point. If control over worker recruitment and enrollment is weak, there is likelihood of dummy names being included in wage sheet, and this is relevant for the auditor. So if when the auditor is evaluating the internal control, he gets aware that the internal control over the worker recruitment and enrollment is weak. So he can now assess now that, okay, if any name of the dummy worker can be included in the list, the wages are given, then it means that there is a problem in the system, right? Whether the controls adequately safeguard the asset, how far and how adequately the management is discharging in function so far as recording of transaction is concerned, how reliable the report, records, and certificates of management can be. See, if internal control is good, then only the reports, the certificates that are given by the management, they are reliable. The extent, see, after having the evaluation, auditor is able to know now the extent and depth of examination that he needs to carry out, that is the nature, timing, extent of his substantive procedure. What would be appropriate audit technique and audit procedure in the given circumstances, whether to rely on the internal control or not? What are the areas where control is weak and where it is excessive? So where the control is weak, auditor will not rely or he will perform more substantive procedures. Where the controls are very much effective, he may decide to rely on the internal control and do a little checking. Whether worthwhile suggestions can be given to improve the control system. So very logical and very simple topic, that is benefits of evaluation of internal control. So auditor can understand that whether errors and frauds can be located in the ordinary course of business, adequate internal control system, whether it exists or not, effective internal auditing department, whether it is there or not. Any administrative control has the bearing on his work, that is whether he should be whether he should see whether that administrative control is working effectively or not. Safeguarding of assets हो रहा है या नहीं, whether the management is discharging its function in function regarding the recording of transactions, whether the management's reports are what reliable, how much checking is to be done, what technique is to be followed, area where the control is weak or excessive, and any suggestions. So few points are relating to management's work. Then how much work the auditor has to do, 2-3 points are relating to that. quickly go through this illustration 9 on page number 3.44. Mr. Y, one of the team members of the auditor of Watt and Ware Limited, was very keen in knowing whether the internal control of the company would safeguard the company's assets, advised Mr. Y. So yes, if he understands in if he obtains the understanding of the internal control, he'll be able to know whether the controls adequately safeguard the assets or not. Same way, next question. Mr. H, a team member of the auditor of There and Here Limited, was of the view that evaluation of internal control of the company would help in identifying areas where the internal control is weak. Advice. So this point is also absolutely correct. Students, this next point I'm giving you as a homework. This is given on page number 3.44 of your module. So I'll just give you a brief idea as to what is contained here. So it says formulate audit program after understanding the internal control. So whether the auditor will formulate his audit program after he obtains an understanding of internal control. See, if the auditor doesn't obtain an understanding of the internal control and he forms an audit program, so there too he is going to write that this is also to be checked, this is also to be checked. Why? Because he is not aware as to how the internal control is. So his audit program is going to become what? Bulky. So the term used here is what? Unwieldy and unnecessarily heavy, and the object of the audit may altogether be lost in the mass of entries and vouchers. Why? Because see, if auditor is not aware that whether the internal control with respect to sales and purchases is effective or not, right? Because he haven't taken an understanding about that. He may mention in the audit program that all sales transaction is to be checked, all purchases transaction is to be checked, right? Vis-a-vis a situation where the auditor has taken an understanding and where there is volume of sales and purchases transaction, and he writes in his audit program that only 20% of the sales and purchases transactions are to be checked. So which is the better situation? The second one, right? So this is basically the idea of this entire paragraph, which is given on page number 3.44 and 3.45, right? So go through this topic as a homework. And now the very important topic, which is on page number 3.46, which is what? The various methods of evaluating the internal control. So how to evaluate internal control? So we will do one thing. We will take a break of 10 minutes here, and after 10 minutes, I'll be starting with this topic, which is really very, very important. Evaluation of internal control, the methods for evaluating the internal control. So a break of 10 minutes here, students. So I hope students, you all are back after the break. So now we'll be discussing various methods of evaluation of internal control, which are narrative record, checklist, internal control questionnaire, ICQ, and flowchart, right? So we'll be doing these one by one, very simple and really very important from the point of view of your examination. See students, when the auditor is reviewing the internal control, he is basically examining whether internal control is effective or not, right? So how he'll be doing that? He may do it by reading the various manuals of the organization, right? By studying the organizational charts, various flow charts, and he'll be making various inquiries of the management and the employees. So when he's capturing various information, when he's gathering various information, accumulating various information, he may follow various methods, which are narrative record, checklist, internal control questionnaire, and flowchart. Now, the first one is narrative record. Quickly tell me, what do you understand by the term narrative? Quickly send in your replies, narrative. Description is saying, which is absolutely correct. So description of events or a story kind of thing. So when the entire narration of the internal control is mentioned, that this is the internal control, these are the various systems, these are the weaknesses, or these are the good points. So this is what narrative record. So it is a complete and exhaustive description of the system as found in operation by the auditor. So see, before writing about something, you must have tested it and observed it. So actual testing and observation are necessary before such a record can be developed. Then only you will be able to tell a story now when you yourself are aware. So actual testing and observation is required, right? See, students, this is not practically possible where there are huge internal control system in case of very big organizations that to write about each and every internal control. So this is recommended in case where no formal control system is in operation and would be more suited to small businesses. So where a little internal control system is there, in case of small businesses, there it is recommended. Why? Because there are further there are certain disadvantages of narrative record. See what can be the disadvantages. So I told you that the entire details understanding about the internal control will be mentioned, and to comprehend is what? Understand the system in operation is quite difficult. See, if you're writing about something in a detailed form, you will be writing that, okay, this is contained in this system, this is the feature of the system, and it is difficult to understand each and every aspect of the internal control. It is difficult to identify weakness or gaps in the system. To incorporate changes arising on account of reshuffling of manpower, it is difficult to incorporate all such things. So that these are what the disadvantages of narrative record, right? Then is what? Checklist. So as the name suggests, a list will be given whereby the audit team member will be filling that list. So this is filled by the audit team member. So he'll be given, let's say, a checklist will be given. For example, are tenders called before placing orders? Are the purchases made? So he'll be writing yes or no or not applicable. Whichever is applicable, whichever point, yes, no, or not applicable, whichever is applicable in the case. Purchase are from forms are standardized. Purchase order forms are pre-numbered. So these are what? A checklist with respect to purchases. So let us read. It is a series of instructions or questions. So this is series of questions or instructions which the member of the auditing staff, very, very important. must follow and or answer. So if these are instructions, the same need to be followed and tick should be mentioned that I have done this. Or if answers are to be given, then yes, no. When he completes instructions, the person will be putting the initial so that responsibility is fixed. He initials the space against the instruction. So member of the auditing staff will be filling that checklist and initials will be kept. Answer to the checklist instruction are usually yes, no, or not applicable. This is again on the job requirement. So obviously on the job, when the person is actually checking side by side, he'll be taking this list. And instructions are framed having regard to the desirable elements of control. Obviously, whatever internal control is implemented with respect to that, only the questions will be asked or the instructions will be given. A complete checklist is studied. Now, when that checklist has been made, it has been filled up by the audit staff and the same has been initialed by the person who has done that. It will be studied by the principal, manager or the senior to ascertain the existence of the internal control and its implementation and efficiency. As simple as that. So the purpose is to evaluate the internal control now. So it will be seen whether it actually exists and whether the implementation is whether implementation is what it actually exists and is in use and whether it is efficient or not. Is it clear? Internal control questionnaire, ICQ. Now, what is the difference between checklist and internal control questionnaire? Internal control questionnaire is also having the questions, but here it is to be filled by the client. Very, very important difference. Again, ICQ, internal control questionnaire, is what? Comprehensive series of questions. So first let us have a look at the sample. So let's say this is with respect to purchases, creditors, inventories and fixed assets. So questionnaire kind of thing will be given to the client. So with respect to purchases, it's mentioned are purchases centralized in purchase department. So the client will be writing all these. And where no is given, see, yes means a satisfactory reply. No means that there is something some deficiencies there, or it basically means that, just a minute, it no and no reply implies what? There is certain weakness. So explanation will also be required with respect to such weakness, right? So let us have a look. Acha, we were looking at this. So are the purchases order based on valid purchase requisition? Are the purchases based on competitive quotations? Are the purchase orders P numbered? So you will see the questions are same, more or less. So, but what is the difference? Checklist is to be filled by the audit staff and this is to be filled by the client itself. So a comprehensive series of questions concerning the internal control and most widely used form for collecting the information about existence, operation, efficiency of control. What is the advantage? See, when there is a complete list that, okay, with respect to purchases, these are the questions, with respect to sales, these are the questions, chances that any important area is overlooked is minimized. So it says that oversight or omission of significant internal control review is less likely to occur, right? And obviously, if there is any weakness, the same can be disclosed. The questionnaire form also provides orderly means of disclosing control defects. Okay? So, the questions are so framed that yes answer denotes what? Satisfactory position. No answer suggests weakness. Provision is also made to give further details with respect to no answers, and not applicable reply is also there. The questionnaire is usually, this is really very important, to the client, and client is requested to get it filled by the concerned officials or employees. If on the perusal of the answers, inconsistencies hai, what will auditor do? Auditor is going to discuss that with the concerned officials, and in case any improvement recommendations are to be given, the report shall be prepared for the same. See, Swati is saying, ma'am, the auditor will not get detailed information. See, if you just go through this ICQ, it is in so much detail. So whatever is the information relevant for the auditor. So this is with respect to what purchases. So it is mentioned, are the purchases centralized? Are purchases made only from approved suppliers? Are these maintained for this purpose? Does the master list contain one or more source of supply? Pre-numbered hai nahi, competitive conditions, valid requisitions, employees authorized on whether they are authorized or not, received only by receiving department, Hana? And just have a look at this list. And this is a comprehensive list, right? With respect to the internal control, whatever information the auditor wants to ask, he can mention this in this, right? Is it clear? And if you remember, I told you that when we started this topic, I told you that the auditor, while evaluating the internal control, he may perform many procedures, like by reading the company manuals, by studying the organization and flowcharts, by making suitable inquiries. So when he is accumulating that information, these are the methods. There are other methods also, na, by which he can obtain the information. And this checklist or ICQ, it can be made in a detailed form as is required by the auditor. So Swati, is it clear? Her doubt was that, ma'am, here checklist and ICQ, auditor will not get full information. So this is not the case. And auditor may, as per his requirement, draft the ICQ or the checklist. Is it clear, Swati? Right? And this is to be filled by what? The client, right? So is it clear? Swati, is your doubt clear? Now the next point is what? Flow chart. So you all are aware about various benefits of flow chart. So narrative record में a complete story was mentioned, right? Description. Then was checklist, whereby a series of questions are to be given, that is to be filled by the staff, audit staff. Then we did ICQ, whereby a comprehensive series of questions is to be given, which is filled by the client. Now is what? Flow chart. See, it is important for the auditor to understand the various features of the businesses, the nature of activities, the various channels of goods, materials, like a comprehensive study of the entire process. Let's say if it is a manufacturing concern, so how the process work, how the trading or the administration part is done. Why? Because it helps the auditor to understand the internal control in the correct perspective. So if everything is made in the form of flow chart, it is going to give auditor a bird's eye view of the system and the flow of transactions, and integration and in documentation can be easily spotted and improvements can be suggested. Clear? So if flowchart is given with respect to each and every aspect of the organization which is relevant to the auditor, this is going to help the auditor. Why? Because it gives a bird's eye view. So what are flowchart? You all are aware. Graphic presentation of each part of company system of internal control. It is considered to be most concise way of recording the auditor's review of the system. It minimizes the amount of narrative explanation and thereby achieves a consideration or presentation not possible in any other form. Why? Because it gives you a bird's eye view. See, when the flowchart of essays are given to you, you are able to know as to what all is contained in this essay. Vis-a-vis where 5-6 pages are given. Same way, if you have the flow chart of how all the processes, how all the business areas, whichever are relevant, how the manufacturing process, the trading process or the administration process is working, that is going to give you the auditor a bird's eye view. And wherever he feels that any improvement are to be suggested, the same can be suggested. Okay? Is it clear? Swati is saying it's clear. So I hope students, all 4 methods are clear to you. We have done 4 methods. That is what? Your narrative record, checklist, internal control questionnaire, and flowchart. The next 2 questions are based on this topic only. Quickly go through illustration number 11, which is given on page number 3.51. Illustration number 11. Quickly. In order to evaluate the internal control of your and my limited, a team member of auditors used a method according to which, read the question carefully, do not look at the answer, try to answer it on by own. number of questions relating to internal control of the company were required to be answered by the employees of the company. After obtaining the answer, there was a discussion relating to those answers between the team member of the auditor and employees of the company for a clear picture. State the method of evaluation of internal control as discussed above. Quickly send in your replies. Send in your replies. So it is mentioned here that the same needs to be filled by the employees of the company, that is the client organization. So what is it? It is the internal control questionnaire. Right? Swati, you are correct. Go through illustration number 12 also. Healthy and Useful Limited is into small manufacturing as well as trading business. For the purpose of evaluating the internal control of Healthy and Useful Limited, a team member of the auditor of the company used method according to which whole description of internal control that was operated in the sent company was to be recorded. Identify the method of evaluation of internal control. So, Bhumika, Om, Sukaina, you all are correct. Others, please reply for question illustration number 12 also. Send in your replies. So, it is mentioned that a whole description of internal control that was operating was to be recorded. So, Swati, you are correct. It is what? Narrative record. Simple. So, I hope the methods which are really very, very important, straight question, 3-mark question can come on any of the methods, right? Now, the next topic is testing of internal control. Testing of internal control. So let us do this topic from the summary that I have prepared. Just a minute. So testing of internal control. Students, please tell me whether you are clear with whatever we have done so far. Send in your replies. I'm waiting for your replies. So, testing of internal control. So this is basically whatever we have done, like what all procedures auditor can perform and whether he'll be checking all internal controls all the time. So these are the topics that are given in this topic on page number 3.52. See, after understanding the internal control, auditor will check whether or IC is actually in operation. Abhi tak we have done what? Evaluation. So whether it is actually in operation or not. Now, will auditor check all the internal controls that have been implemented? So actual testing will be done on selective basis and it may be done in a way that all important areas are covered in a period of, let's say, 3 years. Right? So after understanding the IC, how will he understand? By evaluating the IC, by performing the methods that we have just discussed, like narrative record or your ICQ or your checklist or the flowchart. He has obtained an understanding. Now, actual testing also he'll do now. So that will be done on selective basis and it will be done in a way that all important areas are covered in a period of, let's say, 3 years, right? Now, when he's testing when he's actually testing, he'll test the design of the accounting system and the internal control system and whether the same is in operation throughout the period. And see, when the auditor is testing the internal control, he'll also see whether the control environment has the strength to reduce the control risk. If you remember, control environment, we have the second point that there should be strength in the components of control environment so as to provide appropriate foundation for the other components of the internal control. Remember? So he'll see that also. And how will he do that? He may perform inspection of the documents. He may perform inquiries, re-performance. See, when an internal control is there, he may re-perform it. He may test the internal control operating on specific computerized applications. If there are, let's say, SAP or any computerized application which has been specifically used in the organization, he will test the internal control by re-performing the same, right? Now, when the auditor is testing the internal control, he'll see how internal controls were applied, whether they were consistent during the period and by whom they were applied, whether they were applied within from, let's say, from the IT system, IT department within the organization, or whether that was implemented by any external organization, any service organization, right? So what he is doing actual testing. Abhi tak we have done what? Understanding, evaluating the internal control. Ab we are actually testing it. So we have seen that after understanding, auditor will see whether it is actually in operation. How? By doing the actual testing on selective basis. Let's say in a way that all important areas are covered in a period of, let's say, 3 years. He'll test the design of accounting and internal control system, whether the same is in operation throughout the year. And this includes a test of control environment also, in order to see whether the strength of the control environment is such that which is used to reduce the control risk. The procedures that he may perform to test the control can be inspection of documents, inquiries, re-performance, or testing internal control operating on specific computerized application, right? Now he may consider whether these are applied, how these are applied, consistency during the period, that is whether internal control is actually operating throughout the year. See, it should not happen that in the month of April and June the same was working, but for the next 10 months the same was not working, and by whom the same was applied. Now, after the testing, auditor finds that there are certain deviations, that is internal control, the purpose for which internal control was implemented, there are certain deviations in that. Let us take a very simple example. For example, that internal control was implemented that with respect to, let's say, payment of taxes. One of the internal control that has been implemented by the management is that they are using, let's say, SAP software. That whenever there is the due date of payment of tax, 2 days prior to that date, a reminder mail will come. But on few occasions, on 1 or 2 occasions, there was a deviation. That is, the mail did not come. So this is what deviation. That is what is intended, whatever was the purpose of the internal control, it was not able to do that on, let's say, few occasions. So there can be certain genuine reasons also. So it says that it can be due to changes in key personnel, seasonal fluctuation in volume of transaction, or human error. So auditor will consider that also, right? If deviations are detected, so after considering genuine reasons also, still there are deviations, auditor is going to perform specific inquiries about what timings of, let's say, example, timings of staff changes. And based on the results of test of control, he will determine whether the internal control are designed and operating as contemplated in preliminary assessment of control risk. See, here auditor is actually testing the internal control. So when he was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement under SA 315, there he was identifying and assessing. Now he is actually testing. So whether his preliminary assessment of control risk, whether that is correct or not, or whether that needs to be revised. Let's say, for example, at the time of identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. When he obtained information, when he assessed the control risks, he thought that the internal controls are really very effective, and he intended to rely on the internal control. But when he's actually testing the internal control, he found that it is actually not operating throughout the year. So now he's going to revise his assessed level of control risk. He's going to revise his assessed level of control risk. And when there is revision of the assessed level of control risk, what is the ultimate impact? See, earlier he thought that internal controls were good. After actual testing, let me add one more thing. Earlier, he thought that internal controls were good, and accordingly, let's say with respect to sales, internal control were good, and accordingly, he decided that internal controls are working effectively. I'll do 20% checking of the sales transaction. But when he actually tested the internal control, he found that in fact the internal controls are not operating effectively. So he revised his earlier assessment of control risk, right? Now, what will he, the auditor may decide that, okay, now I'm going to, let's say, check 60% of the sales transaction. So auditor will modify the nature, timing, extent of the planned substantive procedure. So now there will be what? An implication on the substantive procedures of the auditor. Why? Because based on his earlier assessment of control risk, he decided to check 20% of the sales transaction. But now, since his assessment of control risk has changed, he has decided to extend his substantive procedures by, let's say, by checking what? 60% of the sales transactions. So is it clear? Is this topic clear? So this is given on page number 3.52, 3.53, and it ends on page number 3.54. For your purpose, I have just tried to make a summary of this topic. So is it clear? See, Sukaina, see, it is not practically possible the way we are saying. So Sukaina is saying, why is it mentioned that why the auditor cannot check all the internal control in 1 year? See, the way we are saying that it is not practically possible for the auditor to check all the transactions, let's say sales and your purchases, all the lakhs and lakhs of transactions. It is not practically possible for an auditor. So he resorts to what? Sampling. Same way, when the auditor is checking the internal control, first of all, he is not required to give any opinion on the internal control. Why he is taking the internal control? He has to decide his nature, timing, extent of the substantive audit procedure, that whether he can rely on the internal control or will he have to do detailed checking. Now, checking internal control with respect to each and every aspect, with respect to each and every transaction is not practically possible. So that is why it is mentioned that he may do the actual testing on a selective basis in a way that all important areas are covered, let's say in a period of 3 years. That in a period of 3 years, he must have checked all the important areas of internal control that are relevant to audit. Okay, Sukaina, is it clear? Is this topic clear to you? Please send in your replies. And for all those who want to just take the picture of this topic, you may do that. I'll just minimize the screen for you. So I hope you are able to see this topic. So Sukaina is saying it is clear. So this topic is on page number 3.52, 3.53, and it ends on page number 3.54. Now, students, the next topic that is given in your module is what is an automated environment. So I'll be leaving this topic as of now for the next session. So in the next session, we'll be completing essay 320, which was given in earlier pages, but we haven't done that in the last session. Then this topic also, what is an automated environment? This also I'll be taking up in the next session. So what we will be doing? We'll be doing topic. Achha, before that, let me just take you through one more topic which is given in your question. So I hope you have taken the picture or whatever you want of the screen. So there is one more topic which is given in your questions, which is not given in the chapter as such. So this is given on just a minute. This question number 10. So just go through this question. This is given on page number 3.81. Go through this question. Yes, Swati, you are correct. So, internal control, this is question number 10 on page number 3.81. Internal control over safeguarding of assets against unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposition may include controls relating to both financial reporting and operations objective. Explain, stating clearly the objectives of internal control. Quickly send in your replies whether you are going through this question and whether you are able to understand as to what is to be written in this question. So this question is basically asking about two things. First is what? About the safeguarding of assets with respect to financial reporting and operation objectives. So certain explanation about that. And then to the objectives of internal control are to be stated. So tell me what answer comes to your mind. Give me the topic that you will write as an answer, and please do not look at the answer. Try to answer it on your own. Then we will have a look as to what should be the answer of this question. So I'm waiting for your replies. So see, this is about what? Safeguarding of assets. With respect to what? Financial reporting and operation objectives. So we have done this topic that the safeguarding of assets with respect to financial reporting objectives like the passwords and all with respect to cash disbursement, that is relevant to audit. However, with respect to operation objectives like the excessive usage of material, that is not relevant to audit. So see, internal control, now I am on page number 3.83. Internal control over safeguarding of assets against unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposition may include control relating to financial reporting and operations. The auditor's consideration of such control is generally limited to those relevant to reliability of financial reporting. For example, use of access controls such as passwords that limit access to the data and programs that process cash disbursements may be relevant to the financial statement audit. Conversely, safeguarding controls relating to operations objectives such as control to prevent excessive use of material in production generally are not relevant to financial statement audit. Is it clear? Right? Now read this question again. Internal control over safeguarding of assets against unauthorized acquisition, use, disposition may include controls relating to financial reporting and operation objectives. Explain. So explain this. Stating clearly the objectives of internal control. Now it is asking for the objectives of internal control also. So what are the various objectives of internal control? Transactions are executed in accordance with management general and specific authorization. Transactions are promptly recorded in correct amount, in correct accounting period and appropriate accounts. And assets are safeguarded from unauthorized access, use, or disposition, and the recorded assets are compared with the existing assets at reasonable intervals. Appropriate action is taken in case of any difference in this regard. So this question is asking for the safeguarding of assets with respect to financial reporting objectives as well as operation objective. Plus, it is also asking about the objectives of internal control. So this was a topic which was not covered in the topics that we have done so far. So that is why I have taken up this also, this topic. Okay? Is it clear? Now, as I told you that I'll be leaving this automated environment wala topic for the time being. I'll be taking that in the next session. So let us start with a topic on page number 3.6, which is what? SA 3.65, which is SA 330. That is auditors' responses to assessed risk. If you remember, in the last session, I have told you, just a minute. So in the last session, I told you that auditor identifies and assesses the risk of material misstatement under SA 315. What is the name of SA 315? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. Now, after identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, auditor will respond to such assessed risk. And where does the auditor respond? That is what is meant by respond. That is he perform various audit procedures. So where does he perform? Where does he respond to such assessed risk? Under SA 330. So what is the name of the SA? So it is the auditors. Just a minute. So it is the auditor's responses to assessed risks. The auditor's responses to assessed risk. Where has he assessed such risk? Under SA 315. What is the name of SA 315? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. Are you able to understand what we are studying? And in fact, what we are revising. These are the revisionary classes. I hope you are taking full advantage of these classes, students. So, see SA 330. So it deals with the auditor's responsibility to design and implement responses to the risk of material misstatement, which he identified and assessed by the auditor in accordance with SA 315. So whatever I was telling you is what exactly the same is written here. So it deals with auditor's responsibility to design and implement responses to the risk of material misstatement identified and assessed by the auditor in accordance with SA 315. Okay? So see students, if you remember, we have done one topic that risk of material misstatement exists at two levels. Quickly send in your replies. What are the two levels? We have done this topic in the last session. Quickly send in your replies. Om, Bhumika, Sukaina, Swati, Kiran, Divya, please reply. Ayushi, Manish, please send in your replies. So students, this is a test of whether you are actually doing what has been asked. Swati, you are correct. Others, please listen to the question. I've said that risk of material misstatement exists at two levels. What are those two levels? Swati, you are correct. Sukaina, you are also correct. Others, please check your answers. I'm not asking what are the components of risk of material misstatement, which is inherent risk and control risk. I'm not asking this. Yes, Om, now you are correct. Swati, correct. Bhumika, correct. So risk of material misstatement exists at overall financial statement level and the assertion level. If you remember, assertion level. We have done this topic in the last session that at the overall financial statement level where it has a pervasive effect on the financial statement as a whole, and assertion level mein where it is having the effect on few assertions, so that and the auditor performs further audit procedure in order to respond to such risk. So when the auditor is responding to the risk, he is going to respond at financial statement level and at assertion level. So SA 330 states that the auditor shall design and implement overall responses to address the assessed risk of material misstatement at the financial statement level. And the auditor shall design and perform further audit procedure whose nature, timing, extent are based on and are responsive to the assessed risk of material misstatement at the assertion level. Simple. Overall financial statement level पे जो भी risk है, auditor is going to respond to those risks. He is going to design and implement the overall responses to such risk. And with respect to the risk at the assertion level, he is going to perform specific audit procedures which are based on and which are responsive to the assessed risk of material misstatement at the assertion level. Is it clear? Is it clear? Let me just take you through. I haven't. Just a minute. Okay. So are you able to understand this? So just let me just share with you a chart here. Yeah. I'm on page number 3.72. See, when the auditor responds to assess risk, this is about SA 330. So he tests the control or he performs the substantive procedures. Testing of control means here actual testing that we have just completed one topic, actual testing of internal control. Because understanding to he has obtained under SA 315, here to he is actually performing procedure where he is actually testing. Right? Are you able to understand? This is about internal control. When the auditor checks the financial statements in order to see whether there is any material misstatement, it means he is performing what? Substantive procedures. So the audit procedures that he perform in order to see whether there is any misstatement in the financial statement, that is what your substantive procedures. Substantive procedures can be of two types, which is what? Test of detail. As the name suggests, detail. So vouching and verification. Auditor is checking all the transaction in detail. Auditor is checking all the balances in detail. That is, he's vouching each and every voucher. He's checking each and every voucher. Verification is what? Balances is with respect to what? Balance sheet item. Na? So he's testing. He's testing, let's say building a 10 crores is coming. So he's testing that amount in detail. Or he may perform, so as a part of checking of the financial statement or whatever procedures he performs is what? Substantive procedures. Substantive procedures can further be test of details, as the name suggests, detail mein checking he is doing, or it will be what? Substantive analytical procedure. So if you remember, I always tell you SA 520 will be doing later ratio analysis and everything. So here the auditor is performing analytical procedure as substantive procedure. That is why the name is what? Substantive analytical procedures. Right? Right? I'll repeat it. So auditor's responses to assess risk. The name of SA 330 is what? The auditor's responses to assessed risk. Now, how auditor respond by performing audit procedures, right? Now is the time when the auditor is actually testing, be it internal control or be it the financial statement, because understanding to he has obtained under SA 315, right? Now, when he's checking the internal control, it is called what? Test of control, right? When he's checking the financial statement, these are what? Substantive procedures. Substantive procedures can be test of details or substantive analytical procedure. You all know analytical procedures are what? Ratio analysis and considering the trends, comparing the company data with the industry data. So here he is performing analytical procedures as substantive procedures. So that is why the name is what? Substantive analytical procedures. Test of details, as the name suggests, is checking the financial statement in detail, which is what? Test of transactions or test of balances, which is vouching and verification, right? Auditor will definitely perform substantive procedure irrespective of his reliance on internal control. Because wholly and solely based on his test of controls, he cannot give his opinion, because ultimately the opinion is to be given on the financial statements, and checking of financial statement can be done by substantive procedures. Yes, it is possible that auditor may decide to perform certain substantive analytical procedures only, but he will have to perform substantive procedures because he has to give his opinion on the financial statement, not the internal control, right? Now, here, when the auditor is testing the internal control, tell me quickly, give me the reply. Can there be a situation where the auditor is not testing the internal control? When the auditor is not performing the test of control, quickly tell me. Yes or no? Can there be a situation when the auditor is not testing the internal control? Quickly send in your replies. So, Swati, they are saying yes. I don't know this yes relates to the earlier query. Send in your replies. So, Swati has just answered that yes. See, when the auditor, when he was identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment, including the related control, and if there the auditor decides that the internal control are based on his understanding, based on the identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement, which includes control risk also, and there he finds that the control risk is very high and the internal controls are not operating effectively, and he decides a strategy that, okay, I'll not rely on the internal control. So should he waste his time in checking the internal control or in performing test of controls? Quickly send your answer, yes or no. Quickly. Bhumika, check your answer. There is some confusion in what you have written. So, students, if the auditor assesses here only that I'm not going to rely on the internal control, because as per his identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment under SA 315, he found that the IC are not effective. As per his understanding, the control risk is really very high. So he may skip this step. Right? Why? Because he's not relying on internal control. Then why to waste time in checking the internal control? He'll do his substantive procedures in detail. He'll check the financial statement in detail, either by performing test of details or by performing substantive analytical procedures, or both according to his professional judgment. Right? Now, my next question to you. Can there be a situation where the auditor skips substantive procedures and gives his opinion on the financial statement? Let's say auditor intends to rely on the internal control. He tests the controls of the organization. He has done test of control. Can there be a situation whereby auditor is not performing the substantive procedures at all? Quickly send in your replies. So Om is saying no, Sukaina is saying no, Swati is saying no, which is absolutely correct. So I hope this table or this flowchart is clear to you. Auditor, since he is required to give his opinion on the financial statement, he will have to perform certain procedures in order to see whether there are potential misstatement in the financial statement. He may perform test of details or substantive analytical procedures or a combination of both. But he will have to perform the substantive procedures. Now, when can there be a situation when the auditor is not performing test of control? When he intends not to rely on internal control. Agar rely karna hi nahi hai, then why to waste time in checking the internal control? And where applying only substantive procedure will not give the desired result. Let's say there are lakhs and lakhs of transactions, and only by performing the substantive procedure, that is by not relying on internal control, he cannot give his opinion. In such a situation, in these situations, auditor will test the internal control. So why I have discussed this topic? Because The next topic that I want to discuss is just a minute. And just a minute. I hope students you are able to understand. So, this is on page number 3.66 here. So, very important topic. So, I'll be taking up this entire essay 330 in the next session also, because today I can feel that we will not be able to complete this. The auditor shall design and perform test of controls to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence as to the operating effectiveness. Understanding to 315 mein it has been taken now of relevant controls when. Very, very important. When the auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement at assertion level. See, kahan par under SA 315 auditor did this assessment? SA 315 includes, see, when will he devote his time and team towards checking the internal control? When auditor's assessment of risk of material misstatement includes an expectation that controls are operating effectively, that auditor intends to rely on the operating effectiveness of control in determining the nature, timing, extent of the substantive procedure. See, understanding to le liya under SA 315. But before actually relying on the internal control, see, auditor is giving an expert opinion, na? So he cannot just rely on the internal control based on his understanding. He will perform certain actual testing. But yes, if he intends to rely on the internal control or substantive procedures alone. So what are these substantive procedures? Checking of the financial statement in a very simple language alone cannot provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence at the assertion level. I gave you example where there is lakhs and lakhs of transaction. Volume of transaction is really very high. He has to rely on the internal control, let's say with respect to the sales and the purchase transaction. So I hope you are able to understand this topic also. That is, when will auditor design and perform the test of control? See, if he decides he will not rely on the internal control after his assessment under 315, he will not perform the actual testing. Now, he'll devote his time towards detailed checking of the financial statement, towards detailed substantive procedures. So I hope this topic is clear to you. So let us just have a look at SA 330. Whatever we have done so far. So the responsibility of the auditor is to design and implement responses to risk of material misstatement identified and assessed by auditor in accordance with SA 315. See, yahan par na, I would like to pause and tell you one thing again. If you have understood, if you have learned after understanding what the name of SA 315, see, this is exactly the same language. Implement responses to risk of material misstatement identified and assessed by the auditor in accordance with SA 315. So what is the name? Identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. So it becomes so easy for you to learn, right? So what is the objective of the auditor? As per SA 330, it is to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence about the assessed risk of material misstatement. How? Through designing and implement appropriate responses to those risks, right? SA 330. So I was telling you that risk of material misstatement exists at financial statement level and assertion level. So auditor will design and implement overall responses at the financial statement level and specific audit procedure at the assertion level. The auditor shall design and implement overall responses to address the assessed risk of material misstatement at the assertion level. The auditor shall design and perform further audit procedures whose nature, time, extent are based on and are responsive to assessed risk of material misstatement, right? Now, when the auditor, see, at the assertion level, when the auditor is deciding as to what audit procedures he is going to perform. So he will also consider what risk of material misstatement he assessed, that is, what inherent risk is there and what control risk is there with respect to that particular assertion. wait, let me just go through this point, then ask me the query. In designing further audit procedure to be performed, the auditor shall see you are performing certain procedure with respect to a particular transaction, with respect to which you have already assessed the risk of material misstatement, that is inherent risk and control risk. So when you are deciding that what procedure is to be performed, you will consider both those things. Na? So that is written here. He'll consider, so first, in designing the further audit procedure, the auditor shall consider the reasons for assessment given to risk of material misstatement. See, risk of material misstatement consists of inherent risk and control risk. So what is the reason? So he'll consider both and obtain more persuasive audit evidence the higher the auditor's assessment of risk. Persuasive is what? More convincing. So if the assessed risk of material misstatement ROMM is high, he's going to obtain more convincing, more persuasive audit evidence. See, how will he obtain more persuasive audit evidence? By performing more audit procedures, right? Or by increasing the extent of his checking, right? By taking a larger sample. So let us just read this again. In designing further audit procedure to be performed, the auditor shall consider the reasons for the assessment given to the risk of material misstatement at the assertion level for each class of transaction account balance disclosure, including the likelihood of material misstatement due to particular characteristics of the relevant transaction account balance disclosure. So this is what inherent risk. Whether the risk assessment takes into account the relevant control, that is what control risk, thereby requiring the auditor to obtain audit evidence to determine whether the controls are operating effectively. That is, the auditor intends to rely on the operating effectiveness of controls in determining the nature, timing, extent of the substantive procedures. So is it clear? Is it clear to all of you? And this topic we have covered, that when will auditor check the internal control? So this is simple. You can just have a read. It is in continuation of this only, this topic. So you can just have a read. It is basically saying that if the risk of material misstatement is high, he'll obtain more persuasive audit evidence. So we have covered till page number, we have covered till page number 3.67, except for two topics, that is one relating to the automated environment and the other related to your SA 320, that is materiality. So let me just have a look at the queries that you all have sent. Yes, Bhumika is saying, ma'am, if after understanding that controls of the entity are operating effectively, and where will he understand? Under SA 315. Will the auditor decided he'll rely on internal control, then he will test IC on sample basis? Yes. See, under SA 315, he performed risk assessment procedures, whereby he performed inquiry, inspection, observation, analytical procedures, if you remember, and he obtained an understanding. And he identified and assessed the risk of material misstatement. But when he's actually testing, when now he's actually deciding his extent of checking of the financial statement, see, before that, auditor will actually test na, abhi to understanding liya tha na 315 mein. See, auditor is giving an expert opinion on the financial statement. Based on his assessment about the internal control and his actual testing, then he is going to decide the extent of actual testing of financial statement, that is extent of his substantive procedures. So he'll be doubly sure na, by performing the actual testing of the internal control. And again, as we have seen, it is not practically possible to check all the internal control in 1 year. So maybe in a way that all the internal control that are relevant to the audit are covered, let's say, within a period of 3 years. So Bhumika, is it clear? Quickly send in your replies. Students, please send in your replies. Unless and until you make this session interactive, I'll not be able to continue with confidence, because I really want you all to understand and try to learn in the session itself how to pick up the keywords, because I'm repeating here again, these are revisionary classes for your revision purpose. So revision means that you have once gone through these chapters. So still, in case any queries are there, you can always send in your queries. But as I always say that before coming for the next session, before doing any new topic, it is a must that you go through the earlier topics. That is a cumulative revision of whatever we have done so far. That should have been revised by you before coming for the session. We have sessions on Monday and Wednesday. After Wednesday, see, I'm talking about revisionary classes for audit. So after Wednesday, you have a number of days. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you can very well cover the entire topic, understanding as well as the learning part, or making your summaries or making the keynotes or just looking at the past year questions. This should have been completed before coming for the next session. So students, please tell me that are you actually following the techniques or whatever I have asked you to follow? Quickly send in your replies. So Om is saying clear, Bhumika is saying clear, Swati is saying understood. So students, these classes are for your benefit and you can take full advantage of these classes. But yes, what is required before coming for the session? Do a cumulative reading of all the chapters that we have done so far. And when you'll do that, now just see if you are doing the revision for the first time, the chapter may take half an hour. When you will be revising it for the next time, I assure you that it is going to take 25 minutes. And accordingly, the time will be shortened, like 20 minutes, 15 minutes, we will be able to complete the entire topic. So, ma'am, I have revised 2 chapters. So, Sukaina is saying she has already revised 2 chapters, which is really very, very good. And this is the need of the hour, right? So, on a very positive note, assuming that you all will come after studying this module till page number 3.67, except for 2 topics that we have left. So I'll end the session for today, and in the next session, we'll be completing this chapter. We'll be doing certain questions also, and I'll be uploading the notes with respect to this chapter before coming for the session, right? So thank you, student, for being patient listener, and please study. Please study. That is the only solution for getting good marks in your exams, right? So thank you.